Hey everybody, so sorry about that. I don't know, it buffered on me, and so here we are. Thanks for jumping over. I'll edit this up with the other live and try to repost it so it'll be a little smoother. But so sorry about that. I'll figure out what's going on. I wonder if it might be some of the backgrounds I use just kind of overloading the stream. I might have to go to something a little more basic, so I'll play around with that. So everyone, I was talking about the DNA evidence, and I mentioned before I got cut off there, the things that we can learn from that DNA evidence. So I'm going to give everybody just a moment to join here. Say hi to everybody in the chat. Hey, RI Housewife. Hey, Pink. Geeking Me Out. LH. Cynthia. Bradley. Tracy. Lexa. Letty. Lara, Dandy, appreciate you jumping over really quick with me. Frustrating. I'll get these little bugs worked out though to where it runs smoother for us. Back in business. Yep, we're back up and running. So just a quick recap. We talked about the diary. I think that shows signs of a girl who has a good head on her shoulders, had some goals in her life, and it's unfortunate that her life was taken away from her. And she seemed like she was really kind of looking ahead to her future and was really excited about things to come, and it's really sad to hear what happened. So then I talked about the DNA, everybody, and the things that we can learn from the DNA later on. And so, for example, we can learn the order of the victims potentially in the order that they were attacked. So if Maddie's blood, for example, is found on the victim Xana or Ethan, we can assume that Maddie was stabbed first and then her blood was transferred downstairs to the site of where Xana and Ethan were attacked. So eventually, once they sort through all of this DNA evidence, based on what we've heard about this crime scene, they should be able to piece together the order of the attacks and come up with a pretty good, I guess, motive, or at least come up with who they feel like is a decent target that was the first person attacked. Could be all of them were a target, we don't know, but I do think that they're going to be able to come to some determination there on the order that the victims were attacked. Now, one thing that is interesting is, we've heard different reports about what happened on that second floor. At one point, we heard reports that Ethan, very early on, we heard reports that Ethan was found in the hallway. So he would have been in that kind of long hallway. Let me show you, actually. He would have been in that long hallway that comes right out the door from where Xana's room was. And so there were reports that that's where he was located. But then later on it kind of changed, and it was we were hearing that Xana was the one who was found in the hallway. And so we aren't quite sure still where those two people were found. We've heard Kaylee and Maddie were in the same bed, but we haven't heard a definitive answer on where Ethan and Xana were found. And so, kind of circling back to the DNA, there's been reports of two of the victims at least having defensive wounds. And so defensive wounds would be, them putting their hands up to block a stabbing attack, or their arms could have absorbed an attack. It could be, lacerations on their hands from where they were grabbing on to the knife, trying to hold on to somebody's arm, and then that person pulls the knife back, for example, and it could cut, or coming downward. So defensive wounds are those types of wounds. So in, these reports saying that at least two of the victims had defensive wounds, we don't know, maybe the other two could as well. The autopsies have not been released yet, so we don't know what types of wounds they had. But we have heard that at least two of them had defensive wounds. We don't know for sure which two. We heard at one point it was Xana, that her hands were cut, her fingers were cut. And so that could be true, that Xana was one of them. But that's interesting to me, though, because that means that Ethan are they saying that Ethan did not have defensive wounds? So the one male, this big guy who was attacked, didn't defend himself. He didn't have defensive wounds. So was he completely caught off guard? Was he asleep? And it was Xana who received those defensive wounds. But then we heard, the reports of the crying coming from Xana's room. So if Xana was in her room and she had just been attacked and she's crying, how does Ethan not know or hear that and not respond to that and wake up? Or, if Xana's being attacked and, calling out, how does Ethan not hear that and wake up and come to her aid? And then he would have defensive wounds, right? So who were the two that had defensive wounds, or could more of them have defensive wounds? What does everybody think? Do you think it's just two, or do you think that maybe more of them were awake than we know? So we've heard Xana has defensive wounds. There's been no reports about Ethan's wounds, but how does Ethan not have defensive wounds? He would have had to have been caught off guard or by surprise or while he was sleeping. So that would have had to mean he was attacked before Xana, right? How would Xana be attacked before Ethan without Ethan being aware of that happening? We've also heard reports that Kaylee had more severe wounds than the others, according to her family. Now, not necessarily described as defensive wounds. So could it be Xana and Ethan both have defensive wounds, and maybe upstairs Maddie and Kaylee didn't have as many defensive wounds? Kaylee wasn't a very big person, right, as far as defending herself against somebody Bryan's size with a weapon like that. So defensive wounds, I think, in that situation would be pretty limited. Now, Xana was an athlete. She was a gymnast. So she may have, fought back. I don't know. Kaylee could have fought back too. I'm just trying to kind of think out loud right now about who would have received defensive wounds in this whole crime out of the four of them. Is it just two? Is it three? There haven't been any reports of Maddie receiving any defensive wounds. It's been really quiet about Maddie's wounds. So kind of supports the idea that maybe she was the first target, completely unaware. And then maybe that created some noise and commotion that Kaylee could have responded to and been the second person. But then from there, we don't quite know. Was it Xana or Ethan? And what I'm getting at with the defensive wounds is the transfer of DNA happening. So, for example, if Xana, it's been reported had cuts on her hands, were reaching out and grabbing a hold of this person's knife in their hand and that whole area, it's possible that her fingernails could have scraped, and there could be a transfer of DNA. There could also be other parts of the body that were, she could have swung at. There could be hair follicles that fell out during a struggle. Even, he was wearing a mask. It's been reported. We don't know what type of mask, but a hair could have fallen out. They could have found a hair at the crime scene that we don't know about during this kind of struggle and this transfer of DNA. So we know there's defensive wounds. We know there was a struggle. We've heard reports of somebody even saying there's someone here. So somebody was alerted in the home and there was a struggle. There were defensive wounds. And so that means there's a very good chance of a DNA transfer of some sort. So they're definitely going to be looking under the fingernails of the victims, which we haven't heard anything about yet. Any of the evidence they could have found off of the bodies like that, or like hair follicles from Bryan at the crime scene. So if they have something like that, that would be really hard to explain away. So I'm curious to hear more about the autopsy results, who, you know, kind of how that crime unfolded, who maybe could have fought back, and if they have recovered any other DNA. So let's check out the chat here and respond to a few of the comments there. Maybe. We'll see if it loads for me. Here we go. So we have chat's moving pretty fast. Try to catch one here. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Love you all too. So, Letty, we don't know when the autopsy report will be unsealed. The way that this trial or this case is going right now, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. One of the new documents that I'm going to review here before we wrap up is essentially the defense wanting to put a hold to the whole proceedings here so that they can pursue an avenue of arguing against this whole grand jury indictment. So it's going to be quite a while, I think, before any real evidence gets released to us. And I really think they're going to try to kind of kill all of the talk about this case, you know, and let it die down as much as they can. I think both sides, for whatever reason, are in agreement to do that. So there's not going to be a lot of pushback on that. So both sides are going to just say, yeah, let's just give each other more time. Brian says, well, the young ones will be alive. He's old. He's like, let's get to this trial. So geeking me out, the trial is going to begin in October right now. Now, there is a hearing coming up on June 27th. So let's take a quick look here at some of these documents. I'll keep an eye on the chat as well, everyone. So a few new ones popped up today here. It was actually, they're dated the 13th. They loaded today. So we have the defendant's reply, a motion to stay proceedings, notice of hearing, and then the state's response to the defendant's motion. So I'm not going to be able to cover everything here in the defendant's reply because they do make a lot of comments here, and I want to spend a little more time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another live tomorrow night and go in a little more detail on these documents here. But just really quick right now, I wanted to just kind of update you all on what's going on. But I do want to look at these a little bit closer because there's a few different codes here that are being referenced that I'm curious about. So I want to look into these a bit more and just get more insight about maybe what the defense's angle is here. But for the most part, what they're wanting to do here is they want to put a stay on the trial. So they want to pause everything because they want to argue this for this motion that they're filing to get all of this evidence in the grand jury proceedings released to them for review. So they want to pick through all of this stuff that was presented to the grand jury so that they can look for things that they could use to leverage Bryan's innocence or things to argue against that was presented to the grand jury. So their stance here is, hey, we had a preliminary hearing scheduled, and then out of nowhere there was this secret grand jury proceeding who indicted Bryan, and they're saying we want all of this evidence that was presented to them because we want to be able to argue against, we might want to argue against the validity of some of this evidence, and maybe there's some evidence in there that was presented that could support the defense of Bryan. Now they use that word exculpatory evidence. Now that's a legal term, and it's basically, you know, saying exculpatory, like, oh, it's going to prove his innocence. Well, of course, that's what the defense is. That's what their job is to do. And so that's what everything that they're doing is the point of, right? So when they say that, it doesn't mean that they have like something that Bryan told them that he knows about, and they're saying, oh yeah, Bethany has exculpatory evidence that's going to prove his innocence because Bryan told us about it. No, what they're saying is, we want to interview this person because they might have evidence that's important to the defense of this person. And it's the same thing with the grand jury that they're mentioning. They're saying, we want to challenge the evidence, and we want to go through that evidence to see if there's anything in there that might support his alibi or his defense. So the defense is filing this, and they're essentially saying that he has a legal right to challenge the grand jury indictment, and the court should release all records related in his motion. And then they mention here that the grand jury was impaneled at a time when the small community of Moscow had been exposed to 6 months of intense local national media coverage. And because the state has provided extensive discovery, Mr. Kohberger knows that exculpatory evidence exists. Whether a fair and impartial panel of jurors was assembled amidst intense media coverage is a significant question that the defense must evaluate. So they want to go through all of this evidence that the grand jury reviewed because they want to argue against it. And then they also want to see what they can use to leverage for the defense. They want to question maybe that somebody in the grand jury could have potentially been disqualified or shouldn't have been in the grand jury. They could have been biased or something like that. Sure seems like a lot of money and a lot of time to be wasting on a person who's supposedly innocent. What was he doing that night? Why all the games here? Why do you need all of these little bits of evidence to try to come up with what was he doing that night? Just answer the question. It should be pretty straightforward. Really curious to hear what their defense is going to be. What was he doing that night? Was he there for another reason, or was he not there at all and he was doing something completely different? Yeah, Bryan says he doesn't think they could offer a plea. The families will have a little bit of say in that, I think, if, in offering a plea, if it comes down to it. I know, we know some of the family members want the maximum penalty. But down the road, maybe something changes, we don't know. Yeah, like I said, they'll definitely challenge pieces of the evidence. I just, aside from kind of challenging the evidence, I kind of just want to know what the story is. I want to know what his, if he's just going to say, oh, I was at home asleep, or I was in the neighborhood driving through on my way back from shopping. I thought the store was open. I drove out there. There are 24-hour shopping locations in Moscow. I believe there's a Walmart, maybe. So there's shopping locations there that people from Pullman will drive over to shop at. So is he going to say maybe he was just in town running some errands and he happened to be passing through there? I'm curious to know what the storyline is going to be, aside from just kind of challenging the validity of the evidence and that angle. What are they just going to even say he was doing that night? Hey, Sin. Yeah, I caught some of it. Had some technical issues earlier with the streaming thing. It seems like whenever I restart, it seems to run better the second time. So maybe I'll have to just plan on that next time. We'll see. Yeah, at least a couple of the family members, Sasha, do want to see the death penalty. Sasha Johnson says, I think the family wants him to get death penalty, to get death, at least a couple of them, she says. Yeah, so RI housewife, yeah, got to prove it's his car. But again, it's not just the car. Remember, it's the car and the pings at the same time. So not only do they have the car on video, but they're also picking up cell phone pings of Bryan's phone and the car. So that's going to be hard to explain the combination of those two both together away, right? At the same. If it was just video of a white car, I think, yeah, that's a little easier. But when you say, okay, here's Bryan Kohberger, here's a Whitey Lantra passing by Oak Avenue at 4:40 a.m., and then here's a cell phone pinging off of this tower that matches right where this car in this Whitey Lantra is, and this cell phone is Bryan's cell phone. I mean, that's not easy. You know, that can't. It's not all just mistakes, right? All of these things together add up. It's not just the DNA, right? It's not just the video footage. It's not just the cell phone pings. It's not just the fact that he was following them on Instagram. It's not just the fact that he didn't come forward and report that he drove a Whitey Lantra and may have been in the area on the night of the murders. It's not just the fact that he was purchasing things at the store way down south the next day, and I'll bet you they know what he purchased. It's a good chance that they're cleaning supplies. We don't know what they found as far as knife sale records, the IDs. So it's all of the little things together, right, that add up. It's not just any one thing. Now the defense wants to break it up into one little thing, and they want to dispute every piece of it. They don't want you looking at it as a whole and using common sense. They want to dispute, you know. And if they can dispute enough of it and create enough doubt, then that's how they get him off for doing the crime. Now that's different, though, than proving somebody's innocence, I think. What do you think about that, right? Do you think it's the same? Just because somebody's found not guilty doesn't mean they didn't commit a crime. So, for example, if the defense somehow finds a way to say that the prosecution mishandled the processing of the DNA evidence, so you can't use that, and then they find a way to kind of dispute the video. Oh, you can't use this video evidence, you can't show that to the jury. Doesn't mean that the evidence disappeared or is invalid necessarily. It just means that something happened within the legal process that they can get it thrown out, right? So if they just get evidence thrown out, does that prove Bryan's innocence? I don't think so. I want to see something like an alibi and something that shows he's innocent. Not finding a way that the prosecution just mishandled something in the process and try to piece it apart. That sounds to me like the defense of a guilty person. Yeah, Letty, I agree with you. I think that they are, they're really going to go after this grand jury indictment right now, and they want to hold on this. They want to pause the whole trial so that they can focus on the grand jury indictment. They essentially want a preliminary hearing. So we had the preliminary hearing, but then all of a sudden he was just indicted because there's enough evidence there to indict him, right? That's the other thing that, you know, don't forget, you know, there's a panel of people out there who have seen the evidence. They've seen it all, or you know, at least what's available now. And there's enough of it to say, yeah, this person is going to go on trial for 4 murder charges, and they're going to sit in jail until that trial is done. No bail. So this group of people has reviewed the evidence, and they've determined that. This is a jury of people. So there has to be strong evidence for them to just skip a preliminary hearing. But the defense wants a do-over. The defense wants to say, wait a minute, that's not fair. You did this secret grand jury hearing and you're indicting Bryan. That's not fair. We want to stop everything, and we want to see all the stuff that you gave to the grand jury so that we can argue against it, i.e. we want to have a preliminary hearing. We want to find some loophole there And then what would happen is then just that grand jury proceeding probably would be void, and then we'd probably have to go through a whole preliminary hearing at that point to decide on a trial from there. So that would extend it even further. But the point is there's enough evidence there to indict him. But the defense is going to try to find a loophole and, try to find a way to kind of leverage the legal process in their defense. It appears anyway. We don't know yet what their defense is going to be, but so far it's all been focused on, hey, give us all this evidence so that we can pick through it and try to come up with our argument against the evidence you have. How about just tell us where you were that night, what you were doing? What's with all the gamesmanship? So everybody, I really appreciate you hanging out with me tonight. I apologize for those technical issues. I will get these little details worked out here. I hope you enjoyed chatting with me. I'm going to check out the comments here before I wrap up for a few minutes, though, and answer some questions. But I'll delve into this this grand jury document a bit more. But that's pretty much what's going on. The defense is wanting to challenge this indictment, and they're requesting to pause everything. And so we'll have to kind of sit tight and see what happens here. I would imagine there would be a hearing for this, and they would have to kind of argue their case if it were to get to that extent of them pausing everything so that they can challenge the grand jury proceeding. It's going to be really interesting to see how they rule this. Are they going to allow the defense to do this? Are they going to allow the defense to say, hey, pause, time out, we want to get everything that the grand jury indicted Bryan for, and we want to argue now against that? Well, that's what the trial's for, right? It's at trial level now, so let's argue it at the trial. As far as I'm concerned, you've had 6 months to tell us an alibi and tell us he's innocent. You haven't done that, and now you want to say you want to pick through the evidence and try to find loopholes and things. Well, that's what the trial's for, right? So definitely innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Absolutely. So we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. The trial is going to be interesting whenever it happens. It's not looking good, though. So you can see really quick here, there's another document, and this is the state's response to the defendant's motion. This is what I was mentioning earlier. So the state acknowledges that the discovery in this case is substantial. Okay, so they're just saying, yeah, there's a lot of evidence, and it's ongoing. So the state also recognizes that this case is currently set for jury trial, projected to last 4 to 6 weeks, starting in less than 4 months. So they're saying, balancing the above, the state has no objection to a reasonable extension of time for the defense to comply with its obligation under Idaho Code 19519, with the understanding that and expectation that the state will likewise have a reasonable period of time to respond to any proffered notice of alibi, and with the additional understanding that any defense compliance with Idaho Code 19519. So they're just saying, okay, yeah, we'll give the defense time, but then we're going to want that same time once they get back to us on our request about the alibi, so that the prosecution can then look into those things, right? So I have a feeling that this is going to get dragged out because both sides are pretty much in agreement here that they want more time. Just 4 months away, it sounds like they're still processing evidence, which is not a good thing for Bryan. There's so much evidence, they're still processing it. 6 months later, it's ongoing, right, per this filing. It's an ongoing full discovery. It's ongoing. So they're continuing to get resolution on forensic evidence, and then they're going to share that stuff with the defense. So I don't know if it's going to happen in October. So we'll see. We'll see kind of how these hearings play out, though, on the rulings on the stay and if they're going to allow the defense to argue this grand jury indictment. Yeah, JW says no way in October. Yeah, I don't know. I don't, at this point, I don't see it, but. Yeah, Lara, we can definitely go over the items taken for evidence from Bryan's bedroom and apartment. Yeah, so I will do that on. So what I'll do is I'll look a little bit more into this document, this motion that the defense filed, and then in my next live we can talk about that and take a look and see if there's anything there. Yeah, so ASMR Tingled Pink says, I'm curious as to what evidence may have been found in his apartment search that we don't know about. So they did release little bits, some key stuff, but there definitely could be more. That's, a lot of, comments that I've seen, kind of discussing the defense of Bryan is kind of just assuming that what's been released is all that they have. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, really, of what they really have, especially witness-wise. I think there's a lot more witnesses than... I think we're going to be surprised at how many witnesses saw something. Bradley Knight says, look at Alex Murdaugh's trial. He had to change his alibi. If you're guilty, you definitely don't want to give it prematurely. Good point. Yeah, it's the actions of a guilty person, right? Is playing the game. I just kind of like that other live I did. Just the actions don't imply, in my opinion, to what an innocent person would be behaving. I just think that they would be reacting differently. So it's even mentioned, I wanted to show you all this video as well. It's even mentioned that Bryan was really calm when he was taken into custody, and they asked his attorney, that Labar guy who represented him in Pennsylvania, and they asked him about his demeanor, and he says, oh yeah, he's real calm and he's eager to be exonerated, right? It's like, okay, wow, he's, an innocent guy who's getting apprehended here for this horrendous crime is just nice and calm and he's cool with it. It doesn't make sense. Let me see here if I can find this video for you.
Defender representing Bryan Kohberger at today's hearing. He has visited his client 4 times since his arrest. Mr. Labar, good morning to you. You have a busy day ahead of you. First of all, just quickly, what do you expect to happen today at the hearing?
I expect Bryan to be brought into courtroom 1, and he's likely to sign the extradition paperwork. And
you've visited with him several times. You've made a point to say you have not talked to him or tried to talk to him about the substance of the charges against him. What has his demeanor been like? What has his mood? What have you observed from those multiple interactions in the last few days?
He's being very calm. He's very aware. He understands the proceedings. I did discuss with him what to expect in the upcoming days on his transport, as well as what to expect when he actually returns to Idaho and is likely in front of a magistrate or a judge there.
I recognize you're being careful because you're handling this procedural matter. You're not the person who will be defending him at trial, presumably. But has he reacted to the charges at all? One can imagine being accused of something like this and saying, wait, where did this come from? Why are they coming after me? Have you seen any kind of that behavior from him?
It is a little out of character. He said, I mean, this is not him. He believes he's going to be exonerated. That's what he believes. Those were his words. So he's really been very easy to talk to, actually, and he's in a calm demeanor, like I stated.
What about his family, the mother and father, the sister? They put out a statement. What do they say about the charges against him and what they make of this in terms of the person that they know?
They don't believe it to be Bryan. They can't believe this. They're obviously shocked This is certainly completely out of character, the allegations, and really they're just trying to be supportive with the understanding these four families have suffered loss, so that they're sympathetic towards that, and that's why it should remain really private. And they don't want to try this case in the court of public opinion, and without knowing the facts and evidence, as of right now, they don't really want to comment on things.
His father drove him from Washington State at the holidays back to Pennsylvania. I understand that was a plan that had been in the works for some time. They were also stopped by police a couple of times on the way, I think, for minor traffic violations. Do you believe that to be part of this larger investigation, or is that just a random coincidence?
I believe it to be a random coincidence. I don't disbelieve that Bryan and Michael Kohberger would have made that story up. There's no reason. They have been fully cooperative when they did speak with police and authorities. I know there's some reports that there's no actual evidence that they were stopped in Indiana, but Mr. Kohberger, Michael, had definitely said that they were stopped twice in Indiana back to back.
All right, Jay.
So, you know, again, it's just another thing that kind of goes toward not the way an innocent person, I think, would be responding to this situation. But. So Harlot Oscara mentioned here the DNA from the trash didn't get tossed. Bryan, mentioning to Brian Hoffman, they only said they're not using the genealogical testing, which they did not use for the arrest. So, yeah, I think there was a mix-up there with, you know, the document that was filed where the prosecution responded and said, hey, the defense doesn't need this information because we're not planning on using it. Yeah, I think they were referring to kind of the genealogical process of the testing, not the actual end DNA result, right? The end DNA result is still there of the DNA being found. The defense was wanting access to all of kind of bits of information and evidence within that process that essentially what the state was saying is they don't need that. That's not normal, and that's not anything that we're going to be presenting in trial, right? So kind of pushing back on that request. Because, again, the defense is trying to find as many little details as they can on the evidence that they can find a mistake on to dispute it, which, okay, if that's your strategy, right? I mean, you have to, you know, as the defense, you have to sit there and say, we've got to find a way to disprove all of this evidence. And so you would think that the way to do that would be with a valid story about what really happened, what a real innocent person would explain it away and say, hey, here's what really happened, and this is why this and that, and you know, here's an explanation for all of this. But that's not happening, right? So everyone, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm going to wrap up right now. Please hit the like button for me if you haven't yet. That really helps kind of push the video out to more people. Helps me out, gets more eyes and more views is always good. I'll be back on tomorrow night. We'll talk a little bit more about these documents, and then we can definitely look a little bit closer at the evidence that was recovered from, you know, we can look at from Bryan's apartment and also from the home in Pennsylvania, and we can chat about some of those findings and see if there's anything maybe that will come back around in the trial as being significant. I'll talk to everybody really soon, and thanks again for joining.